The 70th Jubilee, Part 3. Times and Seasons, W.H. Carter, Revisited. In this presentation, we're going to ask the question, is the Jubilee cycle 49 or 50 years? When does the 50th year start in relation to the 49 years? We will look at the possibility of Hezekiah's Jubilee. We will look at the verse, no one knows the day or hour, in context, and put forward a suggestion for a different interpretation. And then we'll have a final exhortation. Is the Jubilee cycle 49 or 50 years in duration? Well, we'll look at the position of the 50th year. In our second study, we came to the conclusion that 7-year sabbatical cycles start in Nisan and fit perfectly with Leviticus 25. So all the positions for the 50th year which we will consider will start from Nisan in the spring. So when we look at Leviticus 25, verses 20 to 22, we see that year 8 and 9 can occupy any of the two left-hand columns as a continuation of the Sabbath year in green in the previous year. We looked at this last time. Where is the position of the 50th year? Let us look at 3 of the most common suggestions. The 50th year is an independent year between Jubilee cycles. The 50th year shares the first year of the next 49-year Jubilee cycle. The 50th year shares the 49th year of the Jubilee cycle. So let's first look at the 50th year as an independent year between Jubilee cycles. The 50th year is a year following the 49-year cycles and is separate in its own right. So the Jubilee cycle is 49 years, as you can clearly see there, plus 1 extra year, which would make it 50 years. Following Leviticus 25, we can count years like this. So the 50th year is in year 8 position of Leviticus 25, verse 22. Let us consider the 50th year sharing the first year of the next 49-year Jubilee cycle. So the 50th year shares the first year of the next 49-year Jubilee cycle. We can clearly see that the Jubilee cycle is 49 years plus 1 year, 50 years. It's in another Jubilee cycle, but it's still part of the other cycle. The 50th year is in the position of year 8 of Leviticus 25 in the new Jubilee cycle. Let us check these 2 possibilities where the 50th year starts at the end of the 49 years, making a 50-year Jubilee cycle. We will check against Leviticus 25 verses 21 to 22. Then I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, and it will bring forth produce enough for 3 years. So let us try the 50th Jubilee year in year 8 position. So year 7 is a sabbatical year, and year 8 is going to be our Jubilee position. We read in Leviticus 25, verse 11, that 50th year shall be a Jubilee to you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap. Yet when we go back to Leviticus 25, we read the next verse, and you shall sow in the 8th year. The 8th year position cannot be a 50th year, as sowing takes place in the 8th year, which is not permitted in the Jubilee year. We see identical with the year of Tishri, starting from Tishri. There's our 50th Jubilee year. You shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its own accord. And yet the scripture says, and you shall sow in the 8th year. You cannot sow in a Jubilee year. Therefore, the 50th Jubilee year cannot occupy the 8th year of Leviticus 25. Let's consider the 50th year shares the 49th year of the Jubilee cycle. The Jubilee cycle is 49 years, but it's minus 9 days. Years finish on Adar 29 or 30, dependent on the length of that last month and the sighting of the moon at the start of it. The Jubilee cycle starts on the 10th of Nisan, remember, the day they entered the land and the day that the lamb was taken for Passover. Not the 1st of Nisan, so the year is 9 days too short. 9 days each 49 years would be lost, which cannot be synchronized with the continuing years. 49 years exactly is needed for calculation purposes and to make a Jubilee cycle. When is the 50th year? Through these studies, we hope we have produced evidence that proves Jubilee cycles are exactly 49 years long. So when considering a 50th year, we must not expect it to share the same characteristics as the other 49 years. It is different. It is proclaimed on a different day, for example. Therefore, we would expect it to overlap other years. So the year of Jubilee. So let's just read it. Verse 8, and you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. And the counting of years is always on the 1st of Tishri, which is the head of the year. The Feast of Trumpets is the day that years are counted. So 49 years have just been counted. Then we read, then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. So the head of the Jubilee year, remember, is only on the 49th year only. The Day of Atonement is the day that the Jubilee year is counted on Tishri 10, the Day of Atonement. You can see clearly that the 50th year is counted and proclaimed 9 days after the 49 years are counted, in the middle of the year. Therefore, the 50th year, the Jubilee year, finishes on the 9th of Nisan, 9 days later than the 49th Sabbatical year. So the Jubilee cycle is 49 years in length, exactly. Brother Carter, in his book, Times and Seasons, page 34, stresses the point that the 50th Jubilee year is not concordant, i.e. it's not identical with the 49th year, but starts 9 days later than the 49th Sabbatical year. He goes on to say, this makes it certain that the Jubilee cycle is one of 49 years and not 50 years. If the 50th year had its own separate year, or it shared it with the first year of the next year's Jubilee cycle, then the Jubilee cycle would be 50 years in length. If the Jubilee cycle is 50 years, then these three studies fall. With the above and the precision of Ezekiel 40 verse 1 and 1 Kings 6 verse 1 independently prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Jubilee periods are 49 years in length. So the 50th year starts 9 days after the 49th year. The 50th year is not counted as position 8 as it does not follow exactly the other 49-year cycle, but overlaps year 7 of Leviticus 25, i.e. the 49th year. So year 7, the 49th year, are counted from the 1st of Nisan to the end of Adar. However, the Jubilee year starts 9 days later, counted 9 days later, and finishes 9 days later. So it's the 10th of Nisan to the 9th of Nisan. This writing shows us that 49 years were counted, and then the servants waited joyfully for the beginning of the new year, for the Day of Atonement to come, when they would be released 9 days later. So 49 years are counted. 9 days later, the 50th Jubilee year is counted. So the biblical calendar and the Jubilee calendar. So the usual calendar for ordinary years is the 1st of Nisan to the 1st of Tishri when it's counted and finishes at the end of Adar. The Jubilee year starts on the 10th of Nisan to the 10th of Tishri when it's counted in the middle, and then finishes on the 9th of Nisan. Notice that the start, middle and end of the Jubilee year are all 9 days later than the 49th sabbatical year. So years start here. Years are proclaimed and counted in the middle of the year, the Feast of Trumpets. Jubilee years are proclaimed and counted in the middle of the year. The Jubilee year starts on the 10th day of Nisan, so it is counted on the 10th day of Tishri. Here's another way of looking at it. Year 1 would be the 10th of Nisan to the end of Adar. The first year starts on the 10th of Nisan as previous Jubilee, would be finishing on the 9th of Nisan, and it must finish first. All the other years, 2 to 49, would start on Nisan 1 and finish at the end of Adar. Years counted on the 1st of Tishri. The year of Jubilee would start on Nisan 10 and finish on 9th of Nisan. Jubilees counted on 10th of Tishri, 9 days after the 49-year count. Jubilees finish on the 9th of Nisan. New Jubilees cycles start again on the 10th of Nisan. In the Bible, we do not read about a special provision for the 50th year if the Jubilee cycle is 50 years. In Leviticus 25, it says, "And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year? Since we shall not sow nor gather in our produce." So the context is the 7th year. The question was, what shall we eat in the 7th year? There is no hint of the question, what shall we eat in the 8th year? Notice there is no mention or provision made for an 8th year, a separate Jubilee year, anywhere in the scriptures. By the silence of an extra 8th year, the scriptures are confirming the fact that the Jubilee cycles are not 50 years. When was the start of the sabbatical cycles and Jubilee cycles? When you come into the land which I give you, you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 49 years. So the very start of sabbatical cycles and Jubilee cycles was the 10th of Nisan, 1406 BC. We will look at it in another way again to try and prove the point of what we're trying to say. So the first year of the 49-year Jubilee cycle starts on the 10th of Nisan, the day they entered the land and the Lamb was chosen. The last Jubilee cycle finished on the 9th of Nisan. The first year would be the 10th of Nisan to the end of Adar. The second year to the 49th year of the Jubilee cycle would be the 1st of Nisan to the end of Adar. The 49th year of the Jubilee cycle would be Nisan 1 to the end of Adar. The 50th year starts on the 10th of Nisan, 9 days after the start of the 49th sabbatical year. The Feast of Trumpets is the day that years are counted on, the 1st of Tishri. 9 days after the 49th sabbatical year is counted and proclaimed, the Jubilee is counted and proclaimed. On the head of the Jubilee year, on the 49th sabbatical year, the Day of Atonement becomes the head of the 50th year, the Jubilee year, and it is counted and proclaimed on the Day of Atonement, 10th of Tishri. Notice the symmetry here. The Jubilee year follows 9 days after the ordinary years. So 9 days after the 49th sabbatical year is counted on the 1st of Tishri, the Jubilee is counted and proclaimed on the 10th of Tishri. Therefore, the 50th year, the Jubilee, starts on the 10th of Nisan, 9 days after the start of the 49th sabbatical year. Therefore, the 50th year, the Jubilee, finishes on the 9th of Nisan, 9 days after the end of the 49th sabbatical year. The last 9 days of the 50th year finishes on the 9th of Nisan. And then the new Jubilee cycle carries on the 10th of Nisan, the day they entered the land and the Lamb was chosen. So the 49-year Jubilee cycle starts on the 10th of Nisan, plus 49 years, and finishes on the 9th of Nisan. Exactly 49 years. Some say Isaiah 37, verse 30, at the time of Hezekiah, was a signature of the 50th Jubilee year. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and the second year what springs from the same. Hezekiah's possible Jubilee year. We will look at this potential Jubilee in the light of what we have learned and see there are real answers we can put forward to what happened at the time of Hezekiah. This, combined with the Jubilee calendar that Roger C. Young points out, shows that the events fit perfectly with the Jubilee calendar, so that we can have confidence in our calendar. This in turn should increase our faith in what God has written down, because it fits perfectly into the events of history. This is a signature of a sabbatical year, I put to you. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and the second year what springs from the same. Isaiah 37, verse 30. Sabbatical year beginning a Nisan spring. Notice there is no mention of sowing for 2 years, just like there is in Isaiah 37, verse 30. Is Hezekiah a 50th Jubilee year? Some suggest that Isaiah 37, verse 30 is a signature of a Jubilee year following Leviticus 25. This shall be a sign to you, you shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and the second year what springs from the same. Also in the third year sow and reap, plant vineyards, and eat the fruit of them. So year 1 is the 49th sabbatical year that those who think this believe. So that's where it would be. Year 2 is the Jubilee year. The 50th year shares the first year of the new Jubilee cycle, is the suggestion. And year 3 is the second year of the new Jubilee cycle. Is Hezekiah a 50th Jubilee year? The yellow and brown coloured years are suggested years of 2 fallow years. Leviticus 25 says, "Then I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, and it will bring forth produce enough for 3 years." So there's the 3 years, 6, 7, and 8. The 3 years in blue would run out in the 8th year. There is no reaping in year 9 as no sowing took place in year 8. There would be no food for the whole year. So that doesn't fit with Leviticus. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and the second year what springs from the same. So this would be the sabbatical year. But we read in Leviticus 25, "That which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vine and dress, for it is a year of rest unto the land." As you can see, by Strong's number here, H5599, Sophia, this year cannot be the 7th sabbatical year because you cannot reap that which groweth of its own accord in a sabbatical year. Linking this to history, this would be the year 701 BC. The 50th Jubilee year would be the year 700 BC. And the next year would be the year 699. What we're going to do is go back to when we start counting Jubilees in 1407 BC in Tishri and see where it does land on the Jubilee calendar. This is the 14th Jubilee cycle, the 3rd sabbatical year, the 21st year. We can clearly see that we are not looking at a Jubilee year, but a sabbatical year in Isaiah 37. We're 21 years away. No, sorry. We're doing the 21st year, so we'd have to go to the 49th year for it to be a Jubilee cycle. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and the second year what springs from the same. Also in the third year sow and reap, plant vineyards, and eat the fruit of them. So this year would be 701, which would be a 6th year of a cycle. The second year would be the sabbatical year, not a Jubilee year. The Jubilee year, as you can see, is 672. BC. And the third year is 699. Some have suggested a second invasion, most probably 687 BC. Again, you can see it follows the same pattern as we're looking at, and it's not near 672 BC, which would be the Jubilee year. So if 701 BC is on a 6th year, the harvest should be enough for 3 years. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and the 2nd year what springs from the same. Also, in the 3rd year, sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. Why then does the scripture say, you shall eat this year such as grows of itself on a bumper harvest year? What made 701 BC different? From Wikipedia, we read this. It was the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. And it says they devastated the countryside of Judah. So if there was any harvest, they'd have had it for themselves, and then they just totally ruined the land. I'll just leave that up for you. This is what Roger C. Young says about a 2 invasion theory. So the year beginning in Nisan spring, let's follow this through. In 701 BC, there would be no sowing would take place in the 6th year, as it could not be reaped in a sabbatical year. No reaping or sowing would take place in the 7th sabbatical year. No reaping would take place in the 8th year, as sowing had not taken place in the 7th sabbatical year. There are 2 Hebrew words for the crop in Isaiah 37, verse 30. Such as groweth of itself, that which springeth of the same. And the Hebrew word is sephir, the scanty crop produced by the shaken grains of the last harvest. H5599 Strongs. And this shall be a sign unto thee, ye shall eat this year such as groweth of itself, and the 2nd year that which springeth of the same, and in the 3rd year sow ye and reap, and plant vineyards and eat the fruit thereof. That which springeth of the same, shehis, a word which does not occur elsewhere other than 2 Kings. It is explained to mean that which springs from the roots of the corn. H7823 Strongs. Cambridge Bible for Schools and Colleges. So let's see what's happening here. Such as groweth of itself, sephir, the scanty crop produced by the shaken grains of the last harvest, allowed in the 6th year, but not the 7th. So it is the 6th year. So the sign 1 would be, there'd be enough food for all the people. Sign 2, enough food for all the people. That which springeth of the same, shehis, a word which does not occur elsewhere. It is explained to mean that which springs from the roots of the corn. So that would be used in the sabbatical year. There is no legislation against eating shehis, that which springs from the roots, on a sabbatical year. Also in the 3rd year, sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. So that would be in the 1st year of a new cycle, sabbatical cycle, 699 BC. But notice this, the 3rd sign, yet in the 8th year there would be no reaping, because there was no sowing in the previous sabbatical year. This would be part of the sign to Hezekiah. that they had a harvest from God in the 8th year without sowing in the 7th year. See how it all fits together marvelously when we know when the Jubilee cycles are. For our next subject, which we do not want to be dogmatic about at all, I could be wrong here, we put forward suggestions for your considerations. When looking at time periods, an important question must be answered. But of that day and hour, no one knows. Which day? The destruction of the temple? The return of Christ? Let us look at the context. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the building of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Context, the fall of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, connected with the destruction of the temple? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? The question is, when shall these things be? Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple. The answer to the question, when shall these things be? Verse 30, Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place, the destruction of the temple and the associated things. These things. The Apostles' generation, AD 70. Again, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. These things, the destruction of the temple, AD 70, I suggest. Gill's exposition of the entire Bible says the same thing, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, which is to be understood not of the second coming of Christ, the end of the world and the last judgment, but of the coming of the Son of Man to take vengeance on the Jews, and of their destruction. For the words manifestly regard the date of the several things going before, which only can be applied to that catastrophe and dreadful desolation. Adam Clarke says, but of that day and hour, and it is often translated season. So that's interesting. So, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. I put it to you that Jesus did not know when the Roman army would come, that he was given limited information from his Father. There was a great urgency which gives the impression that there may be a one-day warning, like in the days of Lot. This is seen in the advice of Jesus. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. He also asked his disciples to pray that it was not in the winter season or on a Sabbath. History shows there was a window of opportunity of about 2 years for believers to flee Jerusalem. The words give the distinct impression that Jesus knew the outline of this time, but was not given the day or hour or the season of the coming destruction. Hence the urgency he gives to leave Jerusalem. In Matthew 25, verse 13, there is uncertainty to whether the phrase, wherein the Son of Man cometh, is part of the original text. Watch therefore, ye know not, neither the day nor the hour. None of us know the day or the hour when we are going to die. Could this be referring to wherein the Son of Man cometh. Well, the words in brackets are omitted by many other texts, and Adam Clarke says the same. These words are omitted by many excellent manuscripts. So all I'm doing is just putting a question mark on this to say, does it really mean that or not? So let us sum up what we have said. We looked at the work of Brother Carter, the dual application to Daniel's 70-week prophecy, 77 years and 70 jubilees. The 70th jubilee dated to history at the head of the year in 574 BC. The 0 jubilee, the 10th of Tishri, 1407 BC. And the Jubilee cycle started when they entered the land on the 10th of Nisan, 1406 BC. Counting should always start from 1st of Tishri, 1407 BC for the Sabbatical cycles. Counting should always start from the 10th of Tishri, 1407 BC for Jubilees. If the talk of a 0 Jubilee was a little hard to get your head round, you can always check and use the 17th Jubilee of Ezekiel 40 verse 1 instead, remembering that counting of the 70th Jubilee started on the 10th of Tishri, 574 BC. Remember there's 2 heads, and the head of the year is when we count years. On the Feast of Trumpets, we count ordinary years on the first day of the 7th month in the middle of the year. And the head of the 50th Jubilee year is only counted on the 49th year of a Jubilee cycle. Ezekiel 40 verse 1, the head of the 17th Jubilee year. When was the start of the Sabbath years and the Jubilee cycles? The 10th of Nisan, 1406 BC, when they entered the land and when the land was chosen. The reason why the Jubilee is not kept today in Israel is an interesting question. It says in Leviticus 25 verse 10, "And ye shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family." The teaching became that if any of the 12 tribes were not inhabiting the land, then the jubilee was not kept. The argument is based on a false premise. It is like saying the following: when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. And we read those abominations in Deuteronomy 18. They must not do these things when they enter the land. Does that mean when they are not in the land, they cannot practice these abominations? Clearly not. This is the argument put forward for not keeping the Jubilee when not in the land. Yet in Ezekiel 40 verse 1, the head of the 50th year, the Jubilee year, was recorded in the scriptures when they were in exile. So we saw that there was one decree that fell on a sabbatical year in 455 AD that Brother Carter put forward. And that there is strong evidence that the death of Herod was in 1 BC. Even if this is not the correct date, it does not invalidate the 70 Jubilee prophecy that we're looking at. We remember that we looked at the sowing and reaping cycles. We confirm that sabbatical cycles start in the spring, following the pattern of entering the land, reaping and sowing. You sow in the 8th year, you reap in the 9th year. And that can't happen if you start with a year starting in Tishri, a civil year. Remember the year of Jubilee, you count 49 years and you count them on the Feast of Trumpets, the 1st of Tishri. And then you cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month on the Day of Atonement, which is 9 days later. We can see clearly that the 50th Jubilee year is counted and proclaimed 9 days after the 49 years are counted in the middle of the year. So we believe the 50th Jubilee year starts on the 10th of Nisan. It's counted on the 10th of Tishri, Day of Atonement in the middle of the year, and it ends on the 9th of Nisan. The proclamation of the 70th Jubilee will be on the Day of Atonement 2024, we believe. The start of the 70 Jubilee cycles was entering the land on the 10th of Nisan, 1406 BC. So we're looking at Daniel's 70th Jubilee now. Year 50, the Jubilee year. Starts on the 10th of Nisan, finishes on the 9th of Nisan. So the start of the 70th Jubilee, we suggest to you, is the 10th of Nisan, 2024. The end of the 70th Jubilee is on the 9th of Nisan, 2025. The proclamation for the 70th Jubilee on the Day of Atonement, 10th of Tishri, 2024. If you believe that sabbatical cycles start in Tishri, then the start of the 70th Jubilee would be the 10th of Tishri, 2024. However, we believe it's this way round. 77s are determined for your people and for your holy city. Again, it's a suggestion, but there seems to be a strong possibility that we could see the open hand of God relating to Jerusalem and its people during this year. If we are correct in our interpretation, then the start of the 70th Jubilee cycle will be in the spring on the 10th of Nisan, 2024. The 70th Jubilee cycle will be counted and proclaimed in the autumn on the 10th of Tishri, 2024. The 70th Jubilee cycle will end in the spring on the 9th of Nisan, 2025. So remember, if we're looking at calendars, look up Herb Selinsky, the biblical calendar I suggest for precise information on this topic. I will let the reader decide how much weight of evidence to put on these things. Naturally, we resist making firm predictions in considering the possibility of the 70th Jubilee commencing in 2024-25. Let us note the words of Brother John Thomas in Elpis Israel, page 360, regarding one of his own end-time calculations. This appears to me at this writing to be the correct interpretation of the times. It is, of course, impossible to say that the interpretation is without error. The ensuing months will determine this point beyond dispute. But this is what it's really all about, isn't it? It's about being ready. That's what we want to impress. If we're wrong, we're wrong. But we want to be ready for whenever Christ returns. Our exhortation is that these studies may have stirred us up, that we may examine ourselves carefully, that we are bringing forth fruit worthy of repentance, that we join the wise virgins and always watch and be ready and about our Master's business at all times until he comes. There's still time for us to repent, to put our house in order, to read regularly on a daily basis the Word of God, to pray to God, to put these things in action. We can think of people in the Bible who have repented after doing terrible things,